Hey folks, before we had iPhones and Instagram, life was a bit different. Imagine a world without selfies, hashtags, or even the internet. Hard to believe, right? But let's take a journey back in time to a place that's rich in history and culture. El Salvador was home to some pretty cool civilizations. We're talking about societies that were advanced in ways we might not even realize today. They had their own systems of governance, trade, and even art. We're talking pyramids, pottery, and a whole lot of history. These weren't just random structures, they were architectural marvels that required incredible skill and knowledge to build. The pottery too tells stories of daily life, rituals, and the people who lived there. The Mayans, those calendar-making geniuses, hung out here. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and artists. Their calendar was so precise that it still baffles scientists today. They built cities that were aligned with celestial bodies, showing their deep understanding of the universe, as did the Lenca and Pipil people. These groups had their own unique cultures and contributions. The Lenca were known for their intricate weaving and pottery, while the Pipil were skilled farmers and warriors. They farmed, traded, and built impressive cities. Their agricultural techniques were advanced, allowing them to sustain large populations. They traded goods like cacao, obsidian, and jade, connecting them with other civilizations. Think of it as ancient urban planning, without the zoning permits. They had marketplaces, residential areas, and ceremonial centers, all carefully planned and constructed. These early Salvadorans were no strangers to drama. Volcanic eruptions? Check. They had to deal with natural disasters that could wipe out entire cities, yet they always rebuilt and adapted. Shifting power struggles? You bet. Different groups vied for control, leading to conflicts and alliances that shaped the region's history. These power dynamics were complex and ever-changing, but through it all, they built a rich culture that still resonates today. Their traditions, art, and knowledge have been passed down through generations, influencing modern Salvadoran culture in countless ways. Next time you're enjoying a cup of hot chocolate, thank the ancient Mayans, they practically invented it. Their love for cacao led to the creation of this delicious drink, which has become a beloved treat around the world. So here's to the ancient civilizations of El Salvador, whose legacies continue to enrich our lives today. Fast forward to the 1500s and things got a little dicey. The world was changing rapidly, and the age of exploration was in full swing. European powers were racing to discover new lands, claim territories, and of course, find wealth beyond their wildest dreams. Enter the Spanish, those intrepid explorers with a penchant for gold and, well, conquering. They were driven by a mix of ambition, greed, and a desire to spread their influence. The allure of gold and other riches was irresistible, and they were willing to go to great lengths to obtain it. Led by Pedro de Alvarado, not exactly the nicest guy in history, the Spanish arrived on these shores, and things got real. Alvarado was known for his ruthless tactics and brutal methods. He and his men were determined to conquer the land and subjugate its people no matter the cost. Imagine showing up to a party, uninvited, and then deciding you own the place. Awkward! The Spanish didn't just arrive, they imposed their will, claiming land and resources as their own. This led to inevitable conflicts with the indigenous people who had lived there for centuries. The indigenous people put up a fight, but the Spanish had horses, guns, and a really bad attitude. The technological advantage of the Spanish, combined with their aggressive tactics, made it difficult for the native populations to resist effectively. The battles were fierce and often devastating. By 1525, El Salvador was officially under Spanish rule. The conquest was complete, and the Spanish established their dominance over the region. This marked the beginning of a new era, one that would have profound and lasting impacts on the land and its people. Thus began the colonial period, a time of forced labor, new diseases, and let's be honest, some pretty terrible fashion choices. The indigenous people were subjected to harsh conditions, and many suffered greatly. The introduction of European diseases also took a heavy toll, decimating populations that had no immunity. And while the Spanish brought their own cultural influences, not all of them were welcome or beneficial. Fast forward a few centuries and the people of El Salvador were, understandably, over the whole colonial thing. The year was 1811, and a priest named José Matías Delgado had had enough. He led a grito, that's shout for you non-Spanish speakers, basically telling Spain, it's not me, it's you. We're done. Independence wasn't a clean break, though. It took until 1821 for El Salvador to officially ditch the Spanish crown, and even then, things were, complicated. Think of it like a messy breakup. There were hurt feelings, power struggles, and a lot of figuring things out the hard way. Section 4, Beans, Bullets, and Bad Policy. The 20th century didn't exactly start smoothly for El Salvador. Coffee, that magical bean juice that fuels our mornings, became a big deal. But guess who controlled the coffee? Not the farmers who grew it. Yep, a small group of wealthy families, the infamous 14 families. Talk about a bad case of economic inequality. Throw in political instability, military coups, and you've got a recipe for disaster. By the 1980s, El Salvador was embroiled in a brutal civil war. It was a dark time, marked by violence, human rights abuses, and a whole lot of heartache. Section 5, Big Names, Big Problems. No talk about El Salvador is complete without mentioning Archbishop Oscar Romero. This courageous priest spoke out against injustice and violence, even when it put his own life at risk. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for him. Romero was assassinated in 1980, becoming a powerful symbol of the fight for human rights. Then there's the infamous Roberto D'Aubuisson, a military figure linked to death squads. Let's just say he wasn't exactly winning any peace prizes. These figures represent the complex and often tragic realities of El Salvador's past. Section 6. Uncle Sam, can you spare a dime to fix what you broke? Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the eagle in the backyard, the United States. The US has long been a dominant force on the global stage, often stepping in with the intention of spreading democracy and freedom. But, as history has shown, these interventions have not always gone as planned. In fact, they have sometimes led to unintended consequences that have left lasting scars on the nations involved. Throughout the 20th century, the US played a significant role in El Salvador, often backing military regimes and, well, let's just say their track record wasn't great. The US involvement in El Salvador was part of a broader strategy to curb the spread of communism during the Cold War. However, this often meant supporting authoritarian regimes that committed human rights abuses. Remember that whole supporting democracy thing? Yeah, not so much. Instead of fostering democratic institutions, US policies frequently undermined them. Elections were manipulated, and opposition voices were silenced, all in the name of maintaining stability and protecting American interests. The US poured billions into El Salvador, but much of it went to propping up corrupt governments and fueling the very conflict they claimed to be solving. This financial support often ended up in the hands of military leaders and politicians who used it to enrich themselves rather than improve the lives of ordinary Salvadorans. The result was a cycle of violence and poverty that persisted for decades. It's a complicated history, one that continues to shape relations between the two countries today. The legacy of US intervention in El Salvador is still felt, influencing everything from migration patterns to diplomatic relations. As both nations move forward, there is a need for reflection and accountability to address the past and build a more equitable future. Section 7, El Salvador today, pupusas and progress, but also problems. So, where does that leave El Salvador today? Well, the Civil War ended in 1992, and the country has made strides towards democracy and peace. They've got beautiful beaches, delicious pupusas, seriously, try them, and a resilient spirit that's hard not to admire. But challenges remain. Poverty, gang violence, and corruption continue to plague the country. The current government's embrace of Bitcoin has been, shall we say, interesting. Like a teenager figuring out their first job, El Salvador is navigating a complex world with a mix of youthful optimism and hard-earned wisdom.